The morning mist hung heavy over the Donetsk plains when the silence was shattered. For exactly 47 seconds, the only sound was the distant rumble of diesel engines, 200 Russian tanks rolling toward their destiny. Then the sky erupted with the high-pitched whine of incoming death. March 15, 2024, 6:47 a.m. local time. What happened in the next 8 minutes would rewrite the rulebook of modern warfare forever. By 6:55 a.m., smoke columns marked the graves of armored giants that had cost Moscow nearly half. This is the story of how ingenuity defeated steel, how patience conquered speed, and how a few $100s of consumer electronics brought the age of tank supremacy to its knees. What happens when the unstoppable force of Russian armor meets the immovable object of Ukrainian innovation? What happens when billion-dollar war machines face $500 flying bombs guided by teenagers in basements? The answer lies in those 8 minutes of chaos that turned the most expensive military convoy in the war into twisted metal monuments to tactical evolution. This wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. A methodical, calculated demonstration that in modern warfare, the side with the smartest technology wins, not the side with the heaviest armor. Welcome to Silent Front, where we uncover the untold stories of warfare's cutting edge. Today, we dive deep into the morning that changed everything, when Ukraine's FPV drone swarms proved that in modern warfare, intelligence and innovation will always triumph over raw firepower. The assault had been planned for weeks. 3 separate armored spearheads, each containing over 60 main battle tanks, supported by BMP infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled artillery, and specialized engineering units. This wasn't a probe or a diversionary attack. This was Moscow's bid to punch through Ukrainian lines and seize the strategic crossroads that had been holding up their entire southern offensive. Leading the charge were T-80 BVM and T-90M tanks, Russia's most advanced armor, each worth over $4 million and bristling with reactive armor designed to deflect incoming projectiles. Behind them rolled the support vehicles that make modern warfare possible. Fuel trucks carrying thousands of gallons of diesel, ammunition carriers loaded with tank shells and rockets, mobile repair units, and command vehicles coordinating the entire operation. The formation stretched for over 12 kilometers, an unstoppable steel wall that represented the concentrated might of 3 motor rifle battalions. From overhead, satellite imagery would have shown a metallic serpent winding through the Ukrainian countryside, its scales glinting in the morning sun. This was industrial warfare at its most brutal. Raw tonnage and firepower designed to overwhelm any defense through sheer mass. But the Russians had made critical mistakes. Their communication radio systems that Ukrainian electronic warfare units had been monitoring for months. Their supply lines stretched thin across territory they didn't fully control. Most importantly, their doctrine hadn't evolved beyond the Soviet playbook of massed armor attacks, a strategy designed for a world where the sky belonged to fighter jets and helicopters, not to swarms of tiny, nearly invisible drones. The convoy commanders felt confident. They had an overwhelming firepower advantage, numerical superiority, and air defense systems that could theoretically handle traditional aircraft. What they didn't account for was facing an enemy that had completely rewritten the rules of aerial warfare using consumer technology and battlefield innovation. As the massive formation rolled toward Ukrainian positions, Russian crews remained unaware that every vehicle had already been cataloged, tagged, and assigned to specific drone teams waiting in concealed positions. The hunters had become the hunted, they just didn't know it yet. While Russian commanders counted their tanks and calculated firepower ratios, Ukrainian defenders were preparing a response that would have seemed like science fiction just 3 years earlier. In converted garages, abandoned factories, and underground workshops across the country, teams of engineers, hobbyists, and volunteers had been mass-producing weapons that cost less than a month's salary but could destroy equipment worth millions. The FPV first-person view drone had evolved from a racing hobbyist toy into the most cost-effective tank killer in modern warfare. Each unit consisted of commercial racing drone components, carbon fiber frame, brushless motors, lithium polymer batteries, and a camera system that transmitted live video back to the operator. The total cost? Between $400 and $800 per drone, depending on the warhead attached. But the real innovation wasn't in the hardware, it was in the tactics. Ukrainian drone teams had developed a systematic approach that turned these flying bombs into precision surgical instruments. Each drone was pre-programmed with GPS coordinates of likely target areas, but could be manually guided in the final approach using real-time video feeds. Operators, many of them teenagers who had grown up playing video games, could pilot these weapons with deadly accuracy from distances of up to 5 kilometers. The psychological factor was equally important. Every Russian tank crew now faced an invisible threat that could strike without warning from any direction. Unlike traditional anti-tank missiles that announce themselves with smoke trails and engine noise, FPV drones approach silently at treetop level, giving crews only seconds to react once spotted. In concealed positions throughout the combat zone, dozens of drone operators sat hunched over controllers and video screens. Many worked from underground bunkers or reinforced basements, connected to the outside world only through encrypted communication networks and fiber optic cables that couldn't be jammed. Each operator typically controlled multiple drones in sequence, launching one after another to maintain constant pressure on advancing armor. The contrast was staggering. $500 plastic drones flown by civilians in basements against $4 million tanks operated by professional soldiers. But in those underground command posts, Ukrainian operators had advantages their enemies couldn't match: intimate knowledge of local terrain, real-time intelligence from reconnaissance drones, and most crucially, nothing left to lose. As the Russian formation approached the kill zone, Ukrainian drone teams received their final target assignments. Each tank in the convoy had been identified, cataloged, and assigned to 6:51 a.m. The lead T-90M tank was still 3 kilometers from Ukrainian positions when the first drone found its mark. The operator, a 19-year-old former computer science student named Alexei, had been tracking the formation through his video feed for 12 minutes. His finger hovered over the trigger as he watched the massive tank navigate around a destroyed bridge, its reactive armor gleaming in the morning light. The moment the tank's rear engine compartment came into view, Alexei squeezed the controller. The FPV drone dove at 120 kilometers per hour, its camera maintaining perfect focus on the tank's most vulnerable point. In the final seconds before impact, the tank commander spotted the incoming threat and desperately tried to rotate the turret, but physics had already taken control. The drone's shape-charged warhead detonated directly against the engine compartment with a flash that lit up the dawn sky. The explosion was spectacular. The T-90M's fuel tank ruptured, sending a pillar of orange flame 50 meters into the air. Ammunition stored in the turret began cooking off in rapid succession, like deadly fireworks. Within 90 seconds, the most advanced tank in the Russian formation had become a burning monument to tactical evolution. But the psychological impact was even more devastating than the physical destruction. Radio intercepts captured the panic in Russian voices as they realized their flagship vehicle had been eliminated by an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't effectively fight back against. Tank commanders began frantically scanning the sky, their crews suddenly aware that death could arrive silently from any direction. The smoke column from the destroyed T-90M served as a signal flare for Ukrainian forces. Within minutes, artillery began falling on the convoy's flanks, not enough to stop the advance, but precisely calculated to force the remaining tanks into tighter formations. Russian vehicles instinctively moved closer together for mutual protection, unknowingly making themselves perfect targets for the next wave of attacks. As burning diesel fuel sent black smoke across the battlefield, the sound of the explosion echoed across the plains, a death knell for traditional armored warfare. In basements and bunkers throughout the combat zone, dozens of Ukrainian operators received the same message. First kill confirmed. Begin primary assault. The 8-minute countdown to military history had officially begun. The destruction of their lead tank sent shockwaves through Russian command. Within minutes, desperate orders crackled over radio networks. Deploy countermeasures immediately. All units activate jamming systems. Russian crews scrambled to implement defenses they'd been developing for months. Steel cage armor nicknamed cope cages by Ukrainian forces was hastily deployed over tank turrets. Thick metal mesh designed to detonate incoming drones before they could reach the main armor. Electronic warfare vehicles moved forward, broadcasting powerful jamming signals across multiple frequencies, hoping to sever the connection between Ukrainian operators and their deadly swarms. Some crews improvised their own solutions. Torn camouflage netting was draped over vehicles, spare steel plates were welded to vulnerable points, and machine gunners were ordered to scan the skies continuously for incoming threats. The most desperate even tried deploying smoke grenades to obscure their positions, filling the battlefield with thick gray clouds that reduced visibility to mere meters. But Ukrainian drone teams had anticipated every countermeasure. When Russian jamming cut communication links, the FPV drones switched to autonomous mode, following pre-programmed GPS coordinates to their targets. When cope cages deflected the first impact, Ukrainian operators simply launched multiple drones in sequence. 3, 5, sometimes 8 drones attacking the same vehicle until the defenses crumbled. The coordination was surgical in its precision. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones circled high above the battlefield, identifying which vehicles had the strongest defenses and which showed vulnerabilities. This intelligence was instantly relayed to ground operators who adjusted their tactics in real time. Tanks with effective cage armor were bypassed in favor of softer targets. Fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and command vehicles that couldn't be as heavily protected. The psychological warfare was equally methodical. Ukrainian operators deliberately targeted vehicles in the center of formations, forcing surrounding tanks to navigate around burning wreckage. They struck supply trucks first, knowing that tank crews would panic when they saw their fuel and ammunition disappearing in flames behind them. Each kill was timed for maximum impact on enemy morale. Russian counterattacks grew increasingly desperate as the morning progressed. Some tank commanders tried high-speed sprints across open ground, hoping to outrun the drones through pure velocity. Others attempted to take cover behind buildings or tree lines, only to discover that Ukrainian drones could navigate around obstacles with video game-like precision. The cost equation remained brutally simple. Every destroyed Russian vehicle represented millions of rubles and months of manufacturing, while Ukrainian losses amounted to a few $100s in consumer electronics. Even when Russian defenses succeeded in stopping individual drones, the economic mathematics of the battle favored Ukraine overwhelmingly. By 6:54 a.m., the psychological collapse had begun. Radio intercepts captured the moment when Russian discipline finally cracked. "We can't see them. They're everywhere," screamed a tank commander moments before his T-80 BVM erupted in flames. Across the battlefield, crews who had trained for years to fight enemy tanks, aircraft, and infantry found themselves helpless against an opponent that attacked from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The traditional comfort of heavy armor, the steel cocoon that had protected tank crews since World War II, had become a trap. Instead of safety, their vehicles now represented expensive coffins that attracted swarms of flying death. The panic was contagious. When a BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle abandoned its position and fled toward Russian lines, its crew broadcasting frantic warnings about drone swarms, other vehicles began following suit. Tank commanders who had never retreated from enemy fire found themselves ordering their drivers to reverse course, seeking cover that didn't exist against an enemy that owned the sky. Some crews made the ultimate decision to abandon their vehicles entirely. Satellite footage later showed dozens of Russian tanks and armored vehicles sitting empty in the middle of the battlefield, their crews having fled on foot rather than face certain death inside their steel tombs. These abandoned vehicles represented not just military equipment worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but the complete breakdown of unit cohesion and fighting spirit. The strategic implications were staggering. This wasn't just a tactical defeat, it was proof that the fundamental assumptions of armored warfare had changed forever. The tank, which had dominated battlefields for over a century, was no longer the king of combat. In the age of drone warfare, every armored vehicle was simply a high-value target waiting for a $500 guided missile to find it. Russian military doctrine, built around the concept of massed armor breakthrough operations, lay in ruins alongside the burning tanks. Years of training, billions of rubles in equipment development, and decades of strategic planning had been rendered obsolete in 8 minutes by Ukrainian innovation and consumer electronics. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. These weren't just machines being destroyed. They were monuments to Russian military power being systematically dismantled by an opponent they had underestimated. Each burning tank represented not just tactical loss, but strategic humiliation on a scale that would reshape how wars are fought for generations to come. From underground bunkers, Ukrainian operators watched their video feeds with grim satisfaction. They had proven that in modern warfare, the side with the smartest technology wins, and that sometimes the smartest technology comes from a garage workshop, not a defense contractor. While the world's attention focused on burning tanks, Ukrainian drone operators were executing the war's most devastating logistics strike. Behind the collapsing armored spearhead, a secondary wave of FPV drones was hunting the vehicles that kept the Russian war machine alive. Fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, and mobile repair units. The first target was a convoy of Kamaz fuel tankers positioned 3 kilometers behind the front lines. These vehicles carried over 40,000 liters of diesel fuel, enough to keep an entire tank battalion operational for days. Ukrainian thermal imaging drones had tracked their heat signatures through the pre-dawn darkness, marking each truck's exact location for the strike teams. At 6:56 a.m., fiber-optic guided FPV drones struck simultaneously. The explosions were visible from orbit, massive fireballs that turned the morning sky orange and sent columns of black smoke spiraling into the atmosphere. The loss wasn't just tactical, it was economic warfare at its most efficient. Those fuel trucks represented months of refining capacity and millions of rubles in petroleum products, eliminated by drones costing less than a restaurant dinner. But Ukrainian innovation didn't stop at visible targets. Reconnaissance units had identified camouflaged ammunition depots hidden in tree lines and abandoned farm buildings. These stockpiles contained thousands of tank shells, artillery rounds, and rockets, the lifeblood of the Russian offensive. Using advanced thermal imaging to detect heat signatures from recently moved equipment, Ukrainian forces pinpointed these hidden treasures with surgical precision. One particularly devastating strike targeted what appeared to be an empty barn on the battlefield's periphery. Intelligence had identified unusual vehicle traffic and heat signatures suggesting stored munitions. A single FPV drone penetrated the structure through a damaged roof section, detonating inside the building. The resulting explosion lasted over 4 minutes, thousands of artillery shells and rockets cooking off in a chain reaction that obliterated everything within a 200-meter radius. The economic impact was staggering. Each destroyed ammunition depot represented not just immediate tactical loss, but months of industrial production and transportation effort. Russian forces would need weeks to replace the lost supplies, assuming they could maintain secure supply lines under constant drone surveillance. 6:58 a.m., a Russian T-72B3 tank commander thought he had found salvation, a narrow dirt road leading away from the killing field, apparently clear of drone activity. He was wrong. Hidden beneath a pile of autumn leaves, a static FPV drone had been waiting motionless for over 2 hours. Unlike the flying swarms that had devastated the main formation, this weapon used patience as its primary tactic. Pre-positioned along likely escape routes, these drone mines combined the stealth of traditional landmines with the precision of guided missiles. The innovation was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than flying drones across kilometers of hostile airspace, Ukrainian operators had planted these devices directly in the path of retreating vehicles. Each static FPV was equipped with motion sensors, thermal detection, and a camera feed that allowed remote activation. When the T-72B3 rolled within 30 meters, the operator, watching from a bunker 5 kilometers away, pressed a single button. The drone launched vertically like a jack-in-the-box, reaching attack altitude in under 3 seconds. The tank crew had no time to react. The shaped charge warhead struck the rear engine compartment with surgical precision, turning the escape route into another death trap. The psychological impact was devastating. Russian forces now faced threats from both the sky above and the ground beneath their tracks. This tactic transformed the entire battlefield into a weapon. Every bush, every pile of debris, every roadside ditch became a potential launch point for death. Russian crews, already traumatized by aerial drone swarms, now had to scan the ground ahead for threats that were nearly impossible to detect until the moment of activation. The cost-effectiveness was extraordinary even by Ukrainian standards. Each static FPV cost approximately $600 to produce and deploy, but could destroy vehicles worth millions while requiring zero fuel, no flight time, and minimal operator attention. They were essentially landmines with eyes, guided missiles with infinite patience. 6:55 a.m. In just 8 minutes, Ukrainian forces had rewritten the fundamental rules of modern warfare. 200 Russian tanks, representing over $800 million in military hardware and decades of strategic planning, lay burning across the Donetsk plains. The age of tank supremacy was over. Military analysts from Beijing to Washington watched satellite footage with growing alarm. If consumer-grade technology could neutralize Russia's most advanced armor so completely, what did this mean for their own tank divisions? NATO commanders began emergency reviews of armored doctrine. Chinese strategists calculated the implications for a potential Taiwan invasion. The global balance of military power had shifted in 8 minutes of Ukrainian innovation. The economic implications were equally staggering. Russia had lost not just equipment, but industrial capacity that would take years to replace. Modern tanks require months to manufacture, specialized components from international suppliers, and billions in infrastructure investment. Ukraine had eliminated this capacity using technology that could be mass-produced in garage workshops within weeks. For military contractors worldwide, the message was clear. Billion-dollar weapon systems were no longer guaranteed superiority over $1,000 innovations. The defense industry's fundamental business model, selling expensive, complex systems to government clients, faced an existential threat from creative adversaries with consumer electronics and battlefield ingenuity. Ukraine had proven that in modern warfare, adaptability trumps armor thickness, innovation defeats industrial capacity, and creativity conquers firepower. The country that had been written off by many experts as militarily inferior had just demonstrated tactical superiority that would influence military thinking for decades. The strategic lesson was profound. In the 21st century, the smartest military wins, not the biggest. Wars would no longer be decided by who could build the most tanks, but by who could innovate fastest, adapt quickest, and think most creatively about turning commercial technology into battlefield advantage. 7:03 a.m. The battlefield fell silent once again. Where 200 Russian tanks had rolled with confidence just 16 minutes earlier, only smoke columns and twisted metal remained. The morning mist now carried the acrid smell of burning fuel and the bitter taste of tactical revolution. The numbers told the story of warfare's new reality. $800 million in Russian military hardware destroyed by Ukrainian drones worth less than $200,000. A cost ratio of 4,000 to 1 that proved beyond doubt that in modern conflict, intelligence and innovation matter more than industrial capacity and firepower. But this battle was more than just an economic calculation or a tactical victory. It was a demonstration that the fundamental nature of warfare had changed forever. The age when heavy armor could dominate battlefields through sheer mass and protection was over, replaced by an era where creativity, adaptability, and technological innovation would determine victory. Ukrainian defenders had proven that garage workshops could outperform defense contractors, that teenagers with controllers could outfight professional tank crews, and that $500 drones could neutralize $4 million war machines. They had shown the world that David doesn't need to get bigger to beat Goliath, he just needs to get smarter. The lessons from those 8 minutes in March 2024 would reshape military doctrine for decades to come. Every army on Earth would need to rethink their strategies, their equipment, and their fundamental assumptions about how wars are won. The drone revolution had arrived, and it had announced itself with the destruction of 200 tanks in the span of a coffee break. This is the new reality of warfare, where innovation conquers tradition, where creativity defeats firepower, and where the side that adapts fastest wins. The future belongs not to those with the heaviest armor, but to those with the smartest tactics. That's what Silent Front wanted to share today, the untold story of 8 minutes that changed military history forever. If this deep dive into modern warfare's cutting edge opened your eyes to the tactical revolution happening right now, hit that like button and subscribe for more in-depth analysis of the conflict shaping our world. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on how drone warfare will change future battles, and stay tuned for our next investigation into the technologies rewriting the rules of war.